After Resident Evil 3, it would be a while till the Resident Evil franchise got a sequel of Resident Evil 4. And in between the two were a bunch more experimental titles, or titles that lacked a numerical distinction. The next one we're going to talk about is Resident Evil Code Veronica, the game that directly continues the plot of Resident Evil 2, and was my first Resident Evil game. And you know what they say, you never forget your first Resident Evil.
Resident Evil.
Resident Evil Code Veronica was made in collaboration with Nextech and Sega. See, Sega wanted an exclusive Resident Evil game for their console that failed to gain a lot of traction, despite having a lot of good games. Resident Evil sold well, and so it sold PlayStations. So it might do the same for Sega. Also, they had been meaning to bring Resident Evil games to the Sega Saturn for a while, but couldn't without having to make many concessions. But the thing is, well, we know that that didn't really stay true. When Code Veronica was originally planned, it was thought to have the main character be Jill Valentine, but Jill was thrown out because, well, she was going to be used instead of a generic protagonist in Resident Evil 3. And so we got stuck with Claire looking for a brother in Europe. And with the new power of the Dreamcast, Resident Evil made some really great changes. First of all, what is some really great real-time lighting. Not only is it just drop-dead gorgeous at times, but it plays into the gameplay a lot. You gotta turn on more generators, turn on the power, and lights more than your average Resident Evil game, illuminating objects that you wouldn't normally see. Fortunately, it doesn't really get more complicated than that. There seems to be a huge missed opportunity here. Let me propose a scenario. What if you needed to turn on the power in a pitch dark room that you can't see in? You hear zombies moving around, so you turn on your lighter and, well, you see zombies shuffling around. The thing is that you can't have a weapon and lighter equipped at the same time, very similar to certain sequences in Doom 3. They probably didn't want to do something very similar to a really great sequence that they did early on. So you need to get into this surveillance room towards the beginning of the game. The problem is there's a metal detector between you and the room, meaning you gotta put away almost everything that you've got. So all your weapons, first aid kits, almost anything. You have to walk through the next part without any weapons, and it's probably some of the most tense moments in any Resident Evil game. And, well, once you get to the security room and you do what you need to do, the windows break, and on the way back you gotta navigate a hallway filled with zombies, and, well, you have nothing. It's just so well designed. It comes to me that most of the scariest moments happen very early on in the game. Not to say that there's not some good jump scares later on in the game, they're just more spread out and try to emphasize atmosphere more. The game just feels less grounded and more fast-paced. Kinda has to do with how big the maps are and how varied they are. In the prison, where you start out, it's all prison-y, and then there's this military base, then this mansion, then this underwater airport. Yeah. This would be annoying if the game had the old camera system of moving from screen to screen, having a bit of lag in between. But since the environments in this one are real time, and with the power of the Dreamcast has some really smooth angle switching. Also, the camera will also dolly and pan at times, making it feel almost voyeuristic, like somebody's watching you or following you. It just makes the game feel more fluid when doing the whole normal Resident Evil formula of gathering items, moving from room to room, solving puzzles, dealing with enemies along the way. The plot also really follows that normal plot structure for a RE game. Characters come to a certain location, outbreak occurs, uncover a mystery, tyrant thingy comes loose, you fight it, escape an explosion. But this game does have a more complicated story, and it's probably where I could say that Resident Evil got, well, kinda stupid. I mean, stupider than before. The game involves Claire Redfield looking for her brother at Umbrella headquarters, but then gets captured and put into an Umbrella prison. The prison gets attacked by mysterious forces, and a zombie outbreak occurs. Shocking, right? Claire finds a computer and sends Leon an email to get to Chris, which begs the question, why go looking for Chris when you had a perfectly fine mode of communication with him? Anyways, the main plot is actually genuinely interesting. The twists and turns intriguing. It tells more of a background about the history of Umbrella, and retcons the fate of a certain character and recontextualizes them, and leaves them open for more sequels. The game also seems to have a lot more going on thematically. Claire and Chris being foils to the Ashfords, themes of legacy and succession. This is the closest that the games have been getting to a theme since the first game. This one being that, well, it's really stupid to be nostalgic for the old days, trying to recreate and restore something in the past. You should just look towards the future. So pay attention to the motifs of family, legacy, relationships, and such, and you might find this game a tad deeper than your average Resident Evil game. And that's Code Veronica for you. Would I recommend the game? Well, yeah. Though I am pretty nostalgic for it. But there are parts of the game that I'd say that would put it above other Resident Evil games. Things like graphics, story, and the music. Music is just phenomenal and better than it's been in the whole series before. If I find the time, hopefully it's the music you'll hear in this video. Bottom line, Code Veronica should be more highly regarded and talked about in the RE series, but it's not, and that's a damn shame. Code Veronica sold pretty well for a game for a console that no one bought. It also didn't really help that not too long after the game was released that Capcom announced that it was porting the game to the larger install base of the PlayStation 2, and would also feature cutscenes that couldn't be finished for the original release and have better graphics. Yeah, so naturally the PS2 version that came out the year after sold more copies. On the 5-year anniversary for the first Resident Evil game, Code Veronica was re-released with some extra stuff. Wesker's report, which gives some more further detail into the character and recaps events of the game up until Code Veronica. And also an interview with all of the Resident Evil directors in something called Director's Hazard. I'd recommend looking it up because it has some really interesting insights that Mikami had about the series, and them talking about certain watershed moments, like deciding to scrap Resident Evil 1.5. Also, when it was Kamiya's turn to talk about RE2, he couldn't because he kind of got drunk and passed out, so I thought that was kind of funny. I kind of want to talk about this next Resident Evil game, Resident Evil Gaiden, which came out a year after Code Veronica on the Game Boy Color. And it's a interesting game. The game came out of Capcom's experimentation with porting the original game to the Game Boy Color, which to all accounts was almost done but wasn't released for one reason or another. So, is Resident Evil Gaiden any good? Well, no, it's not. It wasn't really praised at the time when it first came out, but when doing research for this video, it seems like there's more people these days saying that it was actually a decent game, which I'm like, wait, why? The music is repetitive, the gameplay is boring and antithetical to Resident Evil. It's combat unfair. In the original Resident Evil games, you could play the game if you were low at health by dodging enemies and taking them out with your knife. But here, that's not possible at all. See, when you want to attack something, you gotta put your cursor on something, then it turns into a QuickTime event. It's fine by itself, but what ends up happening is that you tend to not have a lot of time to kill the zombie with a knife. Actually, you can't at all. It's impossible because the zombie has to be right up against you, and you have to wait not only for the cursor to be on this sweet spot, but it also has this cooldown timer. Not only that, but like the encounter involves all the zombies in the area. It's just completely unfair and not fun. And that kind of doesn't even include the fact that the story sucks as well. You play as Barry Burton, who's now part of this anti-Umbrella task force. He investigates this one ship, only to realize that the crew is already dead. wait a second, this seems really familiar. Actually, if this game actually copied the Game Boy Color version of Metal Gear Solid, that would be fine, because that's actually a decent game. Just replace the soldiers with zombies, but, you know, no, they didn't do that. That's not what happened. Of course, Gaiden is better than another Resident Evil game that I played. This next Resident Evil game being Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. The game came out of a collaboration between Capcom and Namco to bring Resident Evil game to the arcades. This game is just so bad. So you're on a timer to get through the level, and a boss or else Nemesis will show up and mess you up. The game is a first-person shooter that controls so terribly, your pistol shoots too slowly, and it's just not very reactive, and there's just not even any voice acting. It just goes through the events of Code Veronica in just the worst way possible. Trying to imagine myself playing this in the arcade when there's better rail shooters like House of the Dead or Time Crisis or something like that. It's just not something I could imagine myself doing. This is no bueno. No, I just can't. No, I'm sorry.
We'll send a chopper from across the Cuban border. You should be back at Mother Base in time for lunch. You'll probably just miss our guests. The only catch is you go in solo. The politically sensitive nature of the mission means backup is not an option.
Fine. I like some alone time now and then. Kept you waiting, huh?